He'll never believe you anyway." My daughter-in-law said it so calmly, so casually, you would have thought she was talking about the weather. Then her hand came at me. Not hard enough to leave a mark anyone else would notice. Just enough to remind me exactly where I stood in that house. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I just stood there, one hand resting on the edge of the kitchen counter, feeling the cool marble beneath my fingers, and nodded like I understood. Because in that moment, I did. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels." The kitchen still smelled like the pot roast I had been cooking all afternoon. It was my son Daniel's favorite, 3 hours slow roasted. Just the way his father used to like it too. I had set the table for 3. Plates warmed, silverware aligned, glasses polished until they caught the late afternoon sunlight. Everything looked normal. That was the strangest part. Emily, my daughter-in-law, was already back at the sink, rinsing a glass as if nothing had happened. Her movements were precise, almost elegant. If someone had walked in right then, they would have seen a perfect home, a quiet afternoon, a dutiful older woman, a capable young wife. They would have never guessed what had just happened between us. It had been 3 months since my husband passed, 42 years of marriage, and suddenly, I was alone in a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. Daniel had insisted I move in with them. "You shouldn't be by yourself, Mom," he said. "We'll take care of you." I believed him. Maybe that was my first mistake. At first, everything seemed fine. Emily was polite, not warm, but polite. She asked if I needed anything, reminded me to take my medication, even bought me a new set of towels for the guest bathroom. But something in her tone, it always felt measured, like every kindness came with a limit I couldn't see. Over time, little things began to change. My favorite chair in the living room became Daniel's workspace. My photos were moved from the hallway to a single shelf in the guest room. Conversations would stop when I entered the room, then resume in hushed tones when I left. I told myself I was imagining it. Grief does that to you. Makes you sensitive, makes you see things that aren't there. But then came the rules. Let me handle the groceries. It's easier. Maybe don't answer the phone. I'll take messages. Daniel's very busy. Try not to bother him during the day. Each one sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they felt like walls closing in. And today, standing in that kitchen, with her words still echoing in my ears, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't my home. Not anymore. And in this house, my voice didn't matter. The house was quiet that evening. Too quiet. Daniel came home around 6:15 p.m., just like he always did. I heard the familiar sound of his car pulling into the driveway. The soft click of the front door. The way he set his keys down in the ceramic bowl by the entryway. For a moment, everything felt like it used to, predictable, steady, safe. I stayed in the kitchen, stirring the gravy slowly, watching the steam rise in thin, twisting lines. "Something smells good," Daniel called out, his voice warm, tired. "Pot roast," I answered, keeping my tone even. "Your favorite." He stepped into the kitchen, loosened his tie, and smiled at me, the same smile he had as a boy when he'd come home from school. Hungry and full of stories. "Thanks, Mom," he said, "you didn't have to do all this." I nodded. I wanted to. Emily walked in right behind him, her expression perfectly composed. If I hadn't been standing here just hours earlier, I might have believed nothing had happened. She kissed his cheek lightly. "Long day?" "The usual," he sighed, reaching for a glass of water. I watched them move around each other with ease. Familiar, practiced, like two people who shared a life I was only visiting. We sat down to dinner a few minutes later. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 people pretending everything was normal. Daniel took his first bite and smiled again. "This is really good, Mom. I'm glad you like it." Emily dabbed her napkin against her lips, then looked at me briefly. Just a glance, but it was enough. Cold, controlled, a warning. I lowered my eyes to my plate. "So," Daniel said, cutting into the meat, "I was thinking, maybe we should start looking into something more comfortable for you." "Mom." My hand paused mid-air. "More comfortable?" I repeated. Emily set her fork down carefully. "Just something easier to manage," she said smoothly. "This house has a lot of stairs. And you've been through so much lately." "I'm managing just fine," I replied quietly. Daniel didn't look at me. He kept his focus on his plate. "It's just an idea," he said. "There are some really nice senior communities nearby. Activities. People your age, less stress." Less stress. I almost smiled. Across the table, Emily folded her hands, watching me like she was waiting for something. For me to agree. To make it easy. I thought about the kitchen earlier. About her voice. About the way her hand had come at me. Quick and deliberate. "He'll never believe you anyway." I looked at my son. He was right there, close enough to reach across the table and touch. Close enough to tell him everything. But something inside me held still. Not fear. Not anymore. Something else. I picked up my fork again and took a small bite, chewing slowly. "We'll talk about it another time," I said. Daniel nodded, relieved. "Yeah, no rush." Emily smiled. Soft, satisfied. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully seen before. They had already made their plans. They just needed me to follow along. "He'll never believe you anyway." The words didn't leave me. They followed me the next morning into the kitchen, into the quiet hum of the refrigerator, into the soft light spilling through the window over the sink. I woke up earlier than usual. 5:30 a.m. The house was still asleep, Daniel upstairs, Emily beside him, the two of them wrapped in a life that no longer included me the way I once imagined. I made coffee the way my husband used to like it. Strong, no sugar. I poured it into a mug I'd brought with me when I moved in, a small thing. White with a thin blue line around the rim. One of the few items that was still entirely mine. I sat at the kitchen table and listened. The ticking clock on the wall. The faint sound of pipes in the walls. My own breathing. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when mornings were full. When Daniel would run into the kitchen in his socks, asking what was for breakfast. When my husband would sit across from me, reading the paper, occasionally glancing up just to smile. Back then, I didn't have to wonder if I belonged. Now, I measured my presence. By how quiet I could be. By how little space I took up. By how careful I was not to disrupt anything. Around 7 a.m., I heard footsteps upstairs. Then the shower. Then Emily's voice, soft, controlled, the same tone she used with me, but warmer now. "Daniel, don't forget your meeting today." "I won't," he replied. Normal. Everything sounded so normal. I stood up, rinsed my cup, and began preparing breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, sliced fruit. Simple, familiar. By the time they came downstairs, the table was already set. "Mom, you didn't have to do all this," Daniel said again, almost the same way he had the night before. "I know," I answered. Emily gave me a quick smile. "It looks lovely." She sat down, scrolling through her phone while Daniel poured himself coffee. I watched them quietly. Two people moving through their routine with ease. No tension, no hesitation. No trace of what had happened yesterday. Emily reached for the toast, then paused, glancing at me. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. Her voice was gentle. Concerned. Convincing. I met her eyes for a brief second. "Yes," I said. She nodded, satisfied, and returned her attention to her phone. Daniel didn't notice anything. Not the way her question lingered just a second too long. Not the way I kept my answers short. Not the silence that settled between us. Thin but sharp. After breakfast, he grabbed his keys. "I'll be home a little late today," he said. "Client dinner." "Drive safe," I replied. Emily walked him to the door, kissed him goodbye, and stood there for a moment after he left, watching through the window as his car disappeared down the street. Then she closed the door. Slowly. The lock clicked. And just like that, the house changed. The warmth drained out of the room. She turned to me. No smile this time. No softness. Just that same cold, steady expression I had seen the day before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped closer. Not rushed, not angry. Certain. "You remember what I said," she murmured. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. I simply looked at her, and this time, I didn't look away. Because something inside me had shifted. Very slightly. But enough. I was starting to understand. This wasn't just about silence. This was about control. And for the first time since I moved into that house, I began to wonder what would happen if I stopped playing along. "He'll never believe you anyway." It was strange how a single sentence could follow you like a shadow. I heard it even when the house was quiet, even when Emily wasn't in the room, even when I tried to focus on something else, folding laundry, wiping down the kitchen counter, organizing the few things I had brought with me. It stayed. That afternoon, I found myself in the guest room, my room, as they called it now. A small space at the end of the hallway, just big enough for a twin bed, a dresser, and the narrow window that looked out over the backyard. Most of my life, reduced to a few drawers. I opened the top one slowly. Inside were the things I had insisted on bringing when I moved in. Not much, just what I thought I'd need. A few sweaters. A photo album. And at the very bottom, an old envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges. I hesitated before picking it up. For a moment, I just sat on the edge of the bed, holding it in my hands, feeling the weight of something I hadn't looked at in years. Then I opened it. Inside were letters. Not many, just a few, all written in the same careful handwriting I had known for over 4 decades. My husband's. I pulled the first one out and unfolded it slowly. The paper soft from age. "If anything ever happens to me," it began, "I want you to remember one thing. You are never to let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. Not in your own home. Not in your own family." I stopped reading. The room felt smaller somehow. The air heavier. I could almost hear his voice. Steady and certain, the way it always had been. He had never been a loud man. He didn't need to be. There was something about him, something quiet, but firm, that made people think twice before crossing a line. No one had ever spoken to me the way Emily did. Not when he was around. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the memory come. Sunday mornings, coffee on the porch, the two of us sitting side by side, watching Daniel play in the yard when he was still small enough to believe the world was simple. "You worried too much," my husband used to say, folding the newspaper. "He'll grow up just fine. We raised him right." I had believed that. I had believed that love, consistency, and time were enough to build something that couldn't be shaken. But sitting there now, in that small guest room, holding a letter written years ago, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit. Things change. People change. And sometimes, the life you built doesn't belong to you anymore. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Then I looked around the room again. At the neatly made bed. At the dresser that held only a fraction of my life. At the door that never quite felt like it fully opened for me. For a long time, I had been holding on to what things used to be. To who Daniel used to be. To the version of this family that existed before loss. Before distance. Before quiet shifts I didn't see until it was too late. But memories don't protect you. They don't speak for you. And they don't change what's happening right in front of you. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the backyard was still. The same fence. The same patch of grass. The same place where Daniel once ran barefoot in the summer. Everything looked familiar. And yet, none of it felt like mine. Behind me, I heard a door close somewhere down the hall. Emily. Moving through the house like she owned every inch of it. Maybe she did. But as I stood there, looking out at a life that no longer recognized me, something inside me began to settle. Not anger. Not fear. Something quieter. Clearer. For the first time, I stopped asking myself how to fit in. And started asking a different question. What, exactly, was I still holding on to? "He'll never believe you anyway." By the next morning, the words had settled into something colder. Not just a warning. A challenge. I didn't say anything to Emily. I didn't argue. I didn't even look at her longer than necessary as she moved around the kitchen. Her voice light again, her tone carefully pleasant whenever Daniel was within earshot. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the bank. It was a 15-minute drive. The same route I used to take with my husband sitting beside me. Always the one handling the paperwork. The conversations. The quiet decisions that kept our life steady. Back then, I never asked many questions. I trusted him. Now, as I parked outside the brick building with the faded blue sign, First National Bank, I realized how little I actually knew. I sat in the car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. Then I stepped out. Inside, the air was cool, the kind that always smelled faintly of paper and polished floors. A young teller greeted me with a polite smile, the kind reserved for someone they assumed needed extra time. "I'd like to review my accounts," I said. My voice was steady. She nodded and guided me to a desk near the back, where a woman in her 50s introduced herself as Helen, the branch manager. Her eyes were kind, but observant, the kind of eyes that noticed more than they said. "I'm sorry for your loss," she added gently after I gave my name. "Your husband handled most of the accounts, didn't he?" "Yes," I replied, "he did." "Well," she said, turning to her computer, "let's take a look at everything together." The clicking of her keyboard filled the silence. Then, she paused. Just slightly. I noticed. "Is something wrong?" I asked. Helen leaned in closer to the screen, her expression shifting, not concern. "Exactly, but surprise." "No, not wrong," she said slowly, "just unexpected." My fingers tightened around the edge of my purse. "What do you mean?" She printed out a document and slid it across the desk toward me. "This is your primary checking account. Joint ownership, as expected." I glanced at the number. Modest, familiar, nothing unusual. Then she printed another page. "And this is your savings account. Larger, comfortable, enough to live on, if I was careful." I nodded. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. But Helen didn't stop. "There are also," she hesitated, scanning the screen again, "additional accounts." "Additional?" I repeated. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see. 4 lines. Each with balances that made my breath catch, not dramatically. Not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough. Certificates of deposit. A money market account. And one labeled something else entirely. A trust. I stared at the screen. I don't understand," I said. "I've never opened these." Helen shook her head gently. "You didn't," she said, "but your name is the primary holder on all of them." The room felt very still. "When were these set up?" I asked. She clicked again. "Over the past several years. All authorized, all properly documented." I looked down at the papers in front of me. My own signature printed neatly at the bottom of forms I didn't remember signing. Routine visits, small updates, things my husband must have handled without explanation. He never told me. Not directly. But as I sat there, staring at numbers I hadn't known existed, I began to understand why. Helen folded her hands. "Mrs. Carter," she said carefully, "your husband appears to have made very deliberate arrangements." Deliberate. The word stayed with me. Outside, the afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting long lines across the desk. Inside, something shifted. Because while Emily thought I had nothing, while she believed I had no voice, no leverage, no place to stand, she was wrong. And for the first time since I moved into that house, I realized something she didn't know. I wasn't powerless. Not even close. "He'll never believe you anyway." This time, when the words came back to me, they didn't sting. They clarified things. I sat in my car outside the bank for a long time. The stack of papers resting quietly on my lap. The engine was off. The world moved around me, cars passing, people walking in and out, but inside that small space, everything felt still. Deliberate. That was the word Helen had used. My husband had been deliberate. I thought about all the times he had asked me to sign something over the years. Small things, routine updates, insurance forms, account changes. I never questioned him. I trusted him the way you trust the ground beneath your feet. Steady, certain. Now, looking down at my own name printed across those documents, I realized he hadn't been hiding things from me. He had been protecting me. I drove home slowly, taking the longer route without meaning to. Past streets I recognized, past places Daniel used to visit as a child. A park where he once fell off his bike and cried until his father picked him up. Back then, the world was simple. If something was wrong, we fixed it. If someone was hurt, we protected them. I pulled into the driveway just after 2 p.m. Emily's car was there. Of course it was. I sat for a moment longer before getting out, folding the papers neatly and placing them back into my purse. Not carelessly, not nervously. Carefully. When I stepped inside, the house greeted me the same way it always did, quiet. Controlled, orderly in a way that no longer felt comforting. Emily was in the kitchen. She looked up briefly as I entered. "You were out," she said. Not a question. "Yes," I replied, setting my purse down gently on the chair. "For long?" "Long enough." She watched me for a second, as if weighing something, then she turned back to the counter, slicing something with slow, even movements. The conversation ended there. But something had changed. Not in her. In me. I moved through the house differently that afternoon. Not rushing, not avoiding, just aware. I noticed things I hadn't paid attention to before. The folder on the counter labeled with Daniel's name. The stack of mail that never seemed to include anything addressed to me. The way certain drawers were always closed, and never opened when I was nearby. Patterns. Small ones. But clear. Later that evening, when Daniel came home, everything played out the same way it always did. Dinner. Polite conversation. Emily's soft voice. His distracted nods. But this time, I didn't watch them the same way. I wasn't trying to fit into their rhythm anymore. I was observing it. Carefully. Quietly. Because now I knew something they didn't. Every time Emily glanced at me, every time her smile tightened just a fraction too long, I could see it. A kind of confidence. She believed she understood the situation. She believed she was in control. And maybe, until yesterday, she was. But as I sat there, listening to Daniel talk about his day, watching Emily nod along like everything was exactly as it should be, I realized something simple. Control doesn't disappear all at once. It shifts. Slowly. Quietly. And for the first time since I stepped into that house as a guest in my own life, it had started to shift back toward me. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just listened. And waited. "He'll never believe you anyway." By now, the sentence no longer echoed. It settled. Like something final. That afternoon, I made a phone call. Not to Daniel. Not to anyone in the house. To a number I hadn't used in years. My husband's attorney. His name was Robert Klein, a quiet man in his 60s, with the kind of voice that didn't rush and didn't repeat itself. He had helped us draft our will more than a decade ago. Back when everything still felt stable. I wasn't even sure he still worked there. But when the receptionist transferred the call, and I heard his voice on the other end. "Mrs. Carter?" Something in my chest tightened. "Yes," I said, "it's been a long time." We arranged to meet the next morning. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't tell Daniel. That night, dinner passed like it always did. Small talk, controlled smiles, the quiet rhythm of a household that looked intact from the outside. But inside me, something had shifted again. Not just awareness. Direction. The next day, I arrived at Robert's office 10 minutes early. Old habit. The waiting room hadn't changed much. Same leather chairs, same muted colors, even the clock on the wall ticked with the same slow, deliberate sound I remembered. When he walked in, he looked older, of course. But his eyes were the same. Steady. Observant. "I was sorry to hear about your husband," he said, shaking my hand gently. "Thank you," I replied. We sat across from each other in his office, a large wooden desk between us. I placed the bank documents in front of him. "I went to review my accounts," I said. "There are things I didn't know about." He adjusted his glasses and began reading. Slowly. Carefully. He didn't interrupt. Didn't ask questions right away. When he finally looked up, his expression wasn't surprised. If anything, it was confirming something he already suspected. "He planned this," Robert said. I nodded. "I think so." He leaned back slightly. Your husband came to see me several times in the last few years." He continued. He was very specific about how he wanted things structured. A pause. He was concerned. "About what?" I asked. Robert hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because he was choosing his words. "About what might happen if you were left on your own," he said. "About whether you would have full control, or whether someone might try to influence things." The room felt very still. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. He turned the documents toward me and tapped lightly on one page. "This trust," he said, "is not just in your name. It gives you authority." Authority over what? Over the property, the primary residence, and several associated assets. I looked at him. "You mean the house?" He nodded. "Yes, the house." For a moment, I didn't speak. Images moved through my mind. Emily in the kitchen, her voice calm and certain. Daniel at the table, suggesting something more comfortable for me. They had spoken as if decisions had already been made. As if I was simply going to follow. I folded my hands in my lap. "What does that mean, exactly?" I asked. Robert met my eyes. "It means," he said, "that nothing can be sold, transferred, or reassigned without your approval." A quiet pause. "And it also means," he added, "you have the legal right to decide who stays and who doesn't." The words didn't feel heavy. They felt clear. Like something finally coming into focus after being blurred for too long. I nodded once. "Thank you," I said. When I left his office, the sky was overcast, the air cooler than the day before. But I noticed something else. I wasn't walking the same way. Not slower. Not faster. Just differently. Because now, I understood something Emily didn't. Something Daniel didn't. They thought I was living in their house. They thought I was the one being accommodated. But they were wrong. And soon, they were going to find out. "He'll never believe you anyway." By now, the sentence had lost its power over me. Because I had something stronger. I didn't act immediately after meeting Robert. I didn't confront Emily. I didn't say a word to Daniel. Instead, I prepared. Quietly. The next morning, I returned to the bank. This time, I asked different questions. Not what I had. But who could access it? Helen recognized me the moment I walked in. She gave me that same careful smile. But there was a hint of curiosity behind it now. "I'd like to review access permissions on all my accounts," I said. She nodded, no hesitation. We sat down, and one by one, she pulled up the details. Joint accounts. Authorized users. Linked transfers. It didn't take long to see the pattern. Daniel had access to the primary checking account. That made sense. But beyond that, nothing. No access to the trust. No authority over the larger funds. And most importantly, no ability to make decisions without me. "Would you like to make any changes?" Helen asked gently. I paused. For a moment, I thought about the kitchen. About Emily's voice. About the way she had stood so close to me. So certain I had nowhere to go. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said, "I would." We went through everything carefully. I removed automatic notifications that had been set to Daniel's email. I updated mailing preferences so that all statements came directly to me. I added an extra layer of verification, something simple, but effective. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone would notice right away. But enough. Enough to close doors that had quietly been left open. When I left the bank, I didn't feel nervous. I felt organized. That afternoon, back at the house, I moved through the rooms with a different kind of awareness. Not as a guest. Not as someone trying not to disturb anything. But as someone taking inventory. The living room. The kitchen. The hallway where my photos had once been displayed more prominently. I noticed everything. Emily was in the dining area. Her laptop open, papers spread neatly across the table. She glanced up as I walked in. "You've been out a lot lately," she said. Again, not a question. "Yes," I replied. "For what?" This time, it was a question. I met her eyes. "Just taking care of a few things." She studied me for a second longer than usual. Something in her expression shifted, not enough for anyone else to notice. But I saw it. A flicker. Uncertainty. She looked back down at her laptop. Good, she said. It's important to stay organized. I almost smiled. That evening, Daniel came home earlier than expected. I was reviewing some of the household accounts, he said during dinner, glancing between Emily and me, just trying to get a clearer picture of everything. Emily nodded quickly. That's a good idea. I stayed quiet, taking a small bite of my food. There were a couple things I couldn't access, he added. Probably just need to update some passwords or something. I set my fork down gently. No, I said. Both of them looked at me. Those accounts aren't shared, I continued, my voice calm. They never were. The silence that followed was different. Not tense. Not loud. Just still. Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean? I met his gaze. Steady. It means, I said, there are things your father arranged that don't involve you. Emily didn't speak. But I didn't need to look at her to know she was listening very carefully. For the first time, the balance in that house had shifted. And they could feel it. He'll never believe you anyway. This time, when I remembered the words, I almost appreciated them. Because they told me exactly how far Emily thought she had gone. And how little she thought I understood. That Sunday, Daniel suggested we all sit down together. Just to talk, he said, clear the air. We gathered in the dining room. The same table, the same chairs, the same place where everything had looked so normal just days ago. But nothing felt the same anymore. Emily sat across from me. Her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Calm, controlled, ready. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his elbows on the table. Mom, he began, I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's best for everyone moving forward. Best for everyone. I nodded slowly. Go on. He exchanged a quick glance with Emily. We've been looking into a few options. He continued, places where you'd have more support. Activities, people your age, it might be a better fit. There it was again. Carefully worded. Thoughtfully presented. Emily added softly, it's not about pushing you away. It's about making sure you're comfortable. Safe. Safe. I let the word settle. Then I spoke. And this house? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Well, it's a lot to manage. Financially, too. We were thinking it might make sense to restructure things. Maybe sell. Eventually. Downsize. Restructure. Sell. They had rehearsed this. Every word. I folded my hands on the table, mirroring Emily's posture without realizing it. And you've already made these plans? I asked. No, Daniel said quickly. Not final decisions. Just ideas. Ideas. I turned my gaze to Emily. She held it for a second. Then she smiled. Soft. Polite. The same smile she used when everything was under control. You've been through a lot, she said gently. We just want to help guide things in the right direction. Guide. I nodded once. Then I reached into my bag and placed a single folder on the table. Not dramatically. Not forcefully. Just, there. I agree, I said calmly. It's time we clarify a few things. Daniel frowned slightly. What's that? Something your father prepared, I replied. I opened the folder and turned it toward them. Documents. Clean, organized, official. I watched as Daniel's expression shifted, from confusion to focus. Emily leaned in slightly, her eyes scanning the page. Then, she stopped. Just for a second. A very small pause. But enough. This outlines the ownership structure of the house, I said, and the associated assets. Daniel looked up at me. What does this mean? It means, I said, my voice steady, the house cannot be sold. Not without my approval. Silence. Real silence this time. No polite smiles. No soft explanations. Just stillness. Emily sat back slowly. Her expression didn't fall apart. She didn't react. But something behind her eyes shifted. Calculation. Recalibration. Daniel blinked. Wait, I thought. I know what you thought, I said gently. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just continued. There are also accounts, I added, Funds your father placed under my name. Protected. Separate. Daniel looked between us. I didn't know about any of this. I know, I said. Emily didn't speak. Not yet. She was listening. Adjusting. Trying to understand where the ground had changed. I closed the folder slowly. No one is being rushed into anything. I said, not me, not this house, not these decisions. The air in the room felt different now. Heavier. Clearer. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one being guided. And they both knew it. He'll never believe you anyway. For the first time, I was almost grateful she had said it. Because it made this moment clearer than anything else could have. The room stayed quiet after I closed the folder. Daniel was still looking down at the documents, reading them again as if the words might change the second time. They put everything under you? He asked finally, his voice uncertain. Your father did, I corrected gently. Emily hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the table, her posture unchanged, but I could see it now, the tension in her shoulders. The slight tightening around her eyes. She was thinking. Fast. Carefully. How long have you known? She asked. There was no softness in her voice this time. No accusation either. Just calculation. Long enough, I said. Daniel looked up. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I met his eyes. Because you didn't ask, I replied. That landed heavier than anything else I had said. He leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair. I wasn't trying to, he started. Then stopped. We were just trying to help. I nodded. I understand that. And I did. At least, I understood what he believed. Emily finally spoke again. Well, she said slowly. This changes things. I turned my attention to her. Yes, I agreed. It does. Another pause. Short. Sharp. Then she leaned forward just slightly. But it doesn't change the fact that this house needs to be managed properly. She said, there are expenses, responsibilities, decisions that need to be made. There it was. Not backing down. Just adjusting the angle. I agree, I said calmly. She blinked once, almost surprised by that. I've already started reviewing everything. I continued. Accounts, documents, ownership structure. Daniel looked between us again. You have? Yes. I let the word settle. Then I added, and I've made a few decisions. That got their full attention. Emily's fingers tightened slightly against the table. What kind of decisions? She asked. I didn't rush my answer. I've updated access to the accounts. I said, clarified permissions, ensured everything is aligned with what your father intended. Daniel frowned. What does that mean for me? It means, I said gently, you won't need to worry about managing anything financially. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Not offended. Just unsure. Emily, on the other hand, understood immediately. I could see it in the way her gaze sharpened. You removed access, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I held her eyes. I secured what was mine. Silence. This time, it stretched. Longer. Heavier. Daniel shifted in his seat. Emily? But she didn't look at him. She was still watching me. Measuring. Recalculating. Trying to find the version of me she thought she understood. It wasn't there anymore. I think, I said, standing slowly, we all need a little time to adjust. No one stopped me. No one argued. I picked up the folder, held it lightly at my side, and walked out of the dining room without another word. Behind me, I could feel it. The shift. Not loud. Not dramatic. But undeniable. For the first time since I stepped into that house, I wasn't the one being managed. And for the first time, Emily didn't know what I was going to do next. He'll never believe you anyway. I used to think those words were meant to silence me. Now, I understood something different. They weren't about my voice. They were about control. And control only works when the other person agrees to it. The house felt different after that conversation. Not because anything had changed on the surface. Emily still moved through the rooms with the same careful precision. Daniel still left for work at the same time every morning. Still came home tired. Still tried to keep everything peaceful. But underneath, everything had shifted. The next few days passed quietly. No arguments. No confrontations. Just distance. Emily spoke less to me. When she did, her tone was neutral, polite, but stripped of that subtle authority she used to carry so effortlessly. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed unsettled. He lingered more. Watched more. Twice, he started to say something, then stopped. On the third evening, he finally did. "Mom," he said, standing in the doorway of the guest room, "can we talk?" I looked up from the book in my lap. "Of course." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. That alone told me this was different. He sat down across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together like he was trying to hold something steady. "I didn't know," he said. I nodded. "I know you didn't." He exhaled slowly. I thought we were just helping, making things easier for you." "I believe that," I said. And again, I meant it. At least partially. He looked at me then, really looked this time. Not past me. Not through me. At me. "Emily said you've been distant." He added carefully, "That something feels off." I held his gaze. "Does it?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's why I'm here." For a moment, I saw him as he used to be. The boy who came to me when something didn't make sense. The boy who trusted me to explain the world. I didn't say anything before. I said slowly, because I wasn't sure what I was seeing. "And now?" "Now I am." The room was quiet. He shifted slightly. "About what?" I could have told him everything. About the kitchen. About the moment his wife thought I had no voice. About the way she spoke when he wasn't there. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I said something else. "About myself," I replied. He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "It means," I said gently, "I won't be making decisions out of fear anymore." That confused him. I could see it. "I'm not afraid of being alone," I continued. "I'm not afraid of managing my own life. And I'm not going to agree to something just because it makes things easier for other people." He leaned back slightly, processing. "I never wanted you to feel that way," he said. "I know," I answered. And for the first time in a long time, there was no weight behind the words. Just truth. He nodded slowly, then stood. "Okay," he said, "we'll figure things out." "Yes," I replied, "we will." When he left the room, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Because this wasn't about winning an argument. It wasn't about proving Emily wrong. It was about something much simpler. For the first time since my husband passed, I was no longer trying to hold on to a place in someone else's life. I was reclaiming my own. And that changed everything. "He'll never believe you anyway." That was the sentence she used to try and make me small. To make me quiet. To make me disappear inside my own life. But in the end, she was wrong about one thing. It wasn't about whether my son would believe me. It was about whether I believed myself. A week passed after our last conversation. The house remained calm, almost too calm. No more suggestions about senior communities. No more quiet planning at the dinner table. Emily stayed careful, measured, watching me the same way I had once watched her. Daniel tried. He checked in more, asked if I needed anything, sat a little longer at the table after dinner, like he was trying to rebuild something he didn't fully understand had been broken. And me? I stopped waiting. That Friday morning, I made my decision. Not out of anger. Not out of fear. Just clarity. I called Robert, signed the final paperwork, made sure everything was exactly the way it needed to be. Then I packed. Not everything. Just what was mine. The same suitcase I had brought when I first moved in. The same careful folding of clothes. The same quiet movements. But this time, it felt different. Lighter. When Daniel came home that evening and saw the suitcase by the door, he froze. "Mom?" he said, "what's going on?" Emily stood behind him. Silent. Watching. I walked into the living room slowly, my hands resting lightly in front of me. "I'm leaving," I said. Daniel blinked. "Leaving?" What do you mean leaving? I've arranged a place for myself. I continued. A small house. About 20 minutes from here. His confusion turned into something else. Why would you do that? You don't have to. I know, I said gently. That's why I am. Silence filled the room. Emily didn't speak. She didn't need to. For once, she didn't have control over what was happening. Daniel stepped closer. Did we do something wrong? I looked at him. Really looked at him. You didn't see everything, I said, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there. He swallowed, unsure. I'm not leaving because I have nowhere to go. I added, I'm leaving because I finally understand that I do. That landed. Quiet. Heavy. Final. I reached for my coat, slipping it on slowly. At the door, I paused. Not for long. Just enough. I won't be managed, I said softly, not anymore. Then I opened the door. And stepped out. The air outside was cool, but clear. For the first time in a long time, it felt like mine. Behind me, the house stood exactly the same. Same walls. Same windows. Same life continuing without me. But this time, I wasn't the one being left behind. I walked to my car, placed my suitcase in the trunk, and took one last look, not at the house, but at the version of myself who had once believed she had to stay. She didn't. I got in, closed the door, and started the engine. No hesitation. No fear. Just quiet certainty. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight for a place in someone else's life. It's to walk away. And build your own.